Hello, everyone. This is Don Jergler, and welcome to the Insuring Cannabis podcast, a bi-monthly trip into the intersection of two industries that couldn't be more different. In cannabis, there are the apparent risks: product liability, property, and certainly cyber for medical marijuana operations. They're all well covered, as in they're much talked about. But from what I can tell, one of the most apparent risks to a cannabis operation is one that you really don't hear about much lately. Environmental risks, odor being chief among those, seems to have dropped off the radar of commonly talked about problems for operations as cannabis became more ubiquitous around the country. Things have changed a lot from my early days of covering cannabis and insurance, when odor and environmental issues were front and center of discussions about the cannabis industry, mostly as local communities took umbrage with all the new grow operations popping up. To clear the air, when I say talked about, I'm referring to the headlines I've read, more precisely, news coverage. That, of course, doesn't include conversations that brokers have with their cannabis clients. I'm sure environmental risks are a part of many of those conversations. Brokerage giant Lockton is making such conversations a priority by putting a focus on highlighting environmental coverage, risks, and services for the firm's cannabis clients. A good source for the firm reached out to me to grab my ear about these new efforts, and I felt that if a big firm like Lockton thinks environmental risks for cannabis companies are an important thing to focus on, then we should be talking about it. To find out more about Lockton's new push on environmental coverage for cannabis, I spoke with Kate Dietrich, a vice president and senior environmental specialist with Lockton. So, Lockton has a new push to help their cannabis clients get environmental coverage. But before we get into that, let's talk about some of the environmental risks that cannabis companies are exposed to.
Sure. So when I think about the risks that I talk to our clients about, it's really focused on the cultivation facilities and then maybe the lab or extraction facilities. And I think unmistakably the first environmental risk that I like to share with them to be aware of is odor. So these the cultivation facilities, whether it's an indoor greenhouse or an outdoor facility, unmistakably odorous operations, and certainly not appealing odor to everyone. And so I think that is probably the largest exposure to some sort of complaint or claim. It's an air pollution type of exposure. We have seen nuisance type claims due to odor out there. There's ways to mitigate odor that I know these companies look at. There's certain states that are enacting requirements for odor control or some sort of odor mitigation or prevention type systems. But like with other things with cannabis, there's certain community organizations, there's certain local organizations or community members that just due to their independent stance on cannabis, they're sort of just looking for a reason to raise an issue with these companies. And so knowing these are just unmistakabably odorous operations or can be, there's a potential there for exposure from an air pollution standpoint, someone filing suit for that smell drifting from these facilities. So number one exposure that we're generally talking about these clients is definitely odor. And then second would be chemical usage. And so again, at the cultivation facilities, at the lab or extraction facilities, it's looking at, typically they've got application, storage, even disposal of things like pesticides, herbicides, fertilizer. And so we're looking at those types of risk and saying, okay, what if there is a storage containment failure? What if there is an overspray incident during application? What if there's a fire at the facility? And then that can spread those contaminants in an uncontrolled way. And so a release of any of those types of chemicals into a water source, drinking water source, that can result in some type of water pollution, bodily injury, et cetera. And then I don't like to miss the fact that a lot of these companies are encompassing of other activities. So they may have their own packaging facilities, for instance. And so I like to look at those and say, okay, is there an environmental risk that could arise from that? Are there glues? Are there inks? Anything else within that process that could be considered an environmental risk to the company?
Well, that's significant. The smell one was the one that was top of my mind. Uh, so, what is the state of environmental coverage in the cannabis industry? I mean, are most companies going without it, even the big MSOs?
So I think the industry itself, it's just evolving. I think what we're finding with our book of clients, it's definitely not the first line of coverage that they're purchasing. If I looked at our book, I think probably maybe between 10 and 15% right now purchase this line of coverage, but we're talking to the other ones about it, and the ones that we're bringing into the conversation, once they are understanding of it, once they learn of it, they're purchasing it, and so they're carrying environmental coverage. So I do think it's not a lack of need. I think it's more just a lack of education.
Well, you mentioned need. So, what are you hearing from your clients? I mean, is this something that they desperately need, desperately want?
Yeah, I think once we have those conversations, yes, it is their interest is piqued, and it is resulting in them buying the coverage. If I sort of put myself in their shoes, they've got investors to report to, they've got stakeholders to answer to, and so like any other area of risk, I think that they're dealing with, this is just becoming another one that they are wanting to look at. They want to dive in further. They really want to discuss with somebody that's familiar with the risks, and then the risk transfer solutions that are out there, so that they can make an informed decision. But yeah, I definitely think it's a growing need. And I think the more we talk about it, I think more are going to be interested in it and start carrying it.
Well, are there many pollution policies out there for cannabis companies, or that are at least focused on cannabis?
So it's like other lines of insurance. A lot of the markets within the industry have a stance that they don't want to take part in this until the federal regulations change. But that doesn't say that, that's not to say it's uninsurable or that there aren't markets out there. There is a limited number who have appetite for this and want to ride it, and we're partnering with them. And so we're finding premiums are affordable. It has many key parts of coverage that are very valuable to this particular type of client. So um, there are solutions out there. Yes.
Well, that you mentioned solutions, and I like that. I mean, so what do these policies cover? I mean, they're not just endorsements, on say a GL policy, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that's an important note maybe to mention, is that this the line of environmental insurance, not just for cannabis, but it's the same for cannabis as it is for other industries. The traditional property and casualty policies will typically have exclusions for anything that is pollution related. So similar to these cannabis clients, the solution, typically the broadest and most robust solution is typically not some sort of endorsement on another one of your policies. The solution is a standalone pollution policy or standalone environmental policy. And the things that they cover are very broad. We're finding that there's not an odor exclusion. They cover things like cleanup, third-party bodily injury claims, property damage claims, natural resource damage claims. There's anything. The definition of pollutant is very broad. So it covers anything that goes into the natural environment, whether it's some sort of impact to air, some sort of impact to water, some sort of impact to soil or other natural media. And so these are very broad policies. Legal defense, which in a lot of these odor claims, I would imagine is a significant expense in the overall loss in those claims, and legal expenses included in these policies.
Well, we kind of got into some of the perils, pollution perils, but what's some of the biggest lost activity related to pollution environmental risks? Are there any big lawsuits you know of?
So the biggest one that I have seen is the odor claim. It was an Ohio case, but it was odor related. There were about 200 homeowners in a close by neighborhood of this cultivation facility, and their suit was just based on the grounds that the odor was preventing them from the use and enjoyment of their homes. And so that's the largest one that I know of in the state of Ohio. And like I said, defense is within the limits in these policies. And so I would imagine in that case, if it was a covered sort of loss on a pollution policy, if that particular defendant had one, the defense in itself would be a large part of that loss.
So you're on here because you guys are kind of pushing to help your cannabis clients get environmental coverage. It's a kind of an incentive, and I wanted to talk to you about that. So let's get right into it. Can you elaborate? What are you doing? Who are you doing it with? Or how big are they? Or is there any sizes of particular clients? All the A through Z, please.
Yeah, sure. Our effort really is around education. So like I said, I don't think it's a lack of risk in this space and with these organizations that makes that 10% number I mentioned earlier so small. I think it's just a lack of, distribution of knowledge to these clients. And so, a lot of these are new to Lockton, and as they're coming in the door, we have a substantial effort we're putting forth to make sure that we're bringing this particular area of risk to their attention, and we're diving deeper into each one of them. Each one of them is individually unique. Each one of them are, it might be a smaller operation, it might be a larger multi-state operation. It sort of runs the gamut. A lot of them are maybe more focused on retail locations. A lot of them are the whole package. The cultivation, extraction, and retail. But we try to get really granular because each one of them is unique. Each one of them have their own risk management philosophies and risk appetite. And so we're diving deep into their operations. Where are they operating geographically? What's their surroundings? Are they in community? Is it relatively rural? We're really talking to them in depth about the individual characteristics of their operations so that we can then sort of get into the conversation of what the risk really looks like, and then start talking about what risk transfer solutions are appropriate for them so that they can make those informed decisions. And it's a site-based sort of exposure, but there's ancillary things to it that we want to make sure we're looking at as well. Are they transporting product or raw materials? Waste disposal is another large thing I didn't mention before, but that's an exposure that can also be covered under these policies. Are they disposing of certain things that could result in some sort of liability for that waste stream coming back to them? So we really want to get granular and really understand each one of them, and then talk about the solutions that are out there, and then really customize and tailor a solution for each one of them. So each one looks a little bit different, but I think the overall response from all of them has been, wow, I didn't know this was available. And also number two, I think what I've heard the most is, wow, this is not the price I thought you were going to tell me for this policy. A lot of them are really shocked at how affordable these policies really are. So it is something that I feel like we're bringing a really great solution to them that they did not know existed before.
Well, there you have it. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Insuring Cannabis podcast. You can find other episodes from this series by visiting insurancejournal.tv. Until next time, I'm Don Jergler.